Hey, bienvenidos. Welcome back to Vox Terra. Today I want to share with you two headline news articles about Cuba that I think should be really big news, and I'll tell you why. From Democracy Now! Cuba began a mass vaccination campaign Wednesday using two of its domestically created COVID-19 vaccine candidates. From Nature. Can Cuba beat COVID-19 with its homegrown vaccines? Nature talks to vaccine designer Vicente Vérez Bencomo about the country's efforts to produce its own coronavirus jab. Now here the article points out, the Nature one points out that Cuba has endured decades of trade embargoes imposed by the United States, cutting off access to essential supplies. Now Vicente Vérez Bencomo is director of the state-owned Finlay Institute of Vaccines in Havana. And they asked him how has the U.S. embargo affected things. He said, "We have an American blockade that is not euphemistic at all. It is very real. Companies that have been selling us materials for 60 years under former President Trump got scared." Remember, I think Obama started to lift some of the embargo and told us, "Sorry, we cannot continue cooperating with you because we are afraid that we will lose our trade with North America." Now, in general, in our news media, we only hear bad stories about Cuba. In fact, certain countries seem targeted for bad news only. And the problem, one of the problems with that is that it serves distracting the public from change at home. So, for example, as COVID-19 first was spreading throughout the world, the media really focused on what did China do, rather than looking at how our system is helping spread a disease because we're afraid to shut it down and pause consumer capitalism even for a little while so we can stop the spread of that disease. So now what should be looked at is, why does Cuba have to develop a vaccine in the first place when there are perfectly good vaccines already been developed and have patents? Well, what the media has been underreporting is because Donald Trump initially blocked a move to waive patent protections at the World Trade Organization. And the media barely talked about this. And it wasn't really even just waiving patent protections, it was actually just allowing the World Trade Organization to enter into negotiations to allow the sharing of that patent. Maybe it would be licensing, we don't know. So focusing on a foreign country, all the anger there really takes attention away from change at home. It would benefit the American people to share that patent, because then it'd be less likely there's going to be new variants developing that will outsmart the vaccine. Similarly, I heard an article, and it was on NPR, talking about how North Korea was trying to steal vaccine patent information. But really, shouldn't the story have been, why does North Korea have to steal vaccine patent information? So again, nations that had the capacity to manufacture vaccine, that patent could have been shared with them, like Cuba, like India, like other places, and they could have been also manufacturing vaccine. But it was blocked initially by Trump, and then at first Biden also took up that mantle. But now he's backtracked from that, and he's gone along with what the activist community wants. But when news coverage is all one-sided, when you hear every news commentator referring to a nation as a regime, and there's only a constant drumbeat against them, it not only distracts from change at home, but it also creates the conditions where the public will support an invasion, support an overthrow, or at the least turn a blind eye to some of our dealings that maybe we wouldn't approve of if there wasn't always this constant drumbeat against a particular nation. And again, if we look at the history of these invasions and overthrows, I believe not only do they harm people in the actions of that happening, but I believe they also don't serve the American people well. It also calls into question, if we have a truly free press, wouldn't we hear different sides of an issue, rather than it simply being do we blockade Cuba into starvation, or do we try to engage them to get to change, rather than saying, interestingly, what are they doing right that maybe we could learn from? So, for instance, an underreported story about the Cuban government, or Cuba, that I'd heard in the 90s, but really undercovered, was that Cuba at some point actually outpaced, and maybe still does, the United States in literacy and infant mortality. But yet we barely heard about that here, so we wouldn't even know that things could be done differently. Now, this one-sided coverage really hurt Bernie Sanders. When Bernie Sanders, who was maybe getting a little too comfortable, because Bernie Sanders was good at explaining, hey, the media is owned by big business interests, you got to take it with a grain of salt, He got a little too comfortable when he was sitting in there with CNN's Anderson Cooper, and Anderson somehow got him to say that he thought, I believe it was Castro, did some good things. Well, that was the end. Anderson Cooper went to town with it, and the story circulated all over. And since we only hear one-sided coverage, nobody could understand what Bernie was talking about, and he sort of went a step too far, and that helped sink his primary candidacy. Now, another thing to keep in mind is we don't only hear one-sided coverage only because of the nature of media ownership and that it's all owned by large business interests, but we also hear one-sided coverage because of the nature of our immigration laws. If you try to immigrate to the United States, there's certain things you have to check off that you are not. You are not, interestingly, coming here to practice polygamy. You are also not a communist. So I guess there's a certain bias there against a sharing culture. A little bit of dry humor. But to me, the really biggest thing why it's important to highlight some good news coming out of nations that we view as adversaries, especially if those nations still call themselves socialist, is that what I feel went wrong in the world is that capitalism now has no competition. And if you think about the definition of capitalism, I was taught growing up that it thrives on competition. In fact, that's supposed to be its strength. It harnesses the competitive nature. Now, not all of us really feel that competitive, but some people do. Well, since the USSR has collapsed, capitalism has lost its only real competitor. And over the past 30 years, again, what has happened in the United States, with capitalism no longer having a competitor, we've dropped our ambitious space program. We've barely taken action on the environment. The disparities between wealth and poverty have grown. In fact, it's my belief that if the Soviet Union did not collapse and capitalism still had a competitor, it couldn't keep on saying, we're just going to keep burning fossil fuels regardless of the evidence, and we're going to pay for scientists to say it's fine to burn fossil fuels all this time and sort of delay progress for 30 years. I don't think that would have happened. But with no competition, capitalism really can't function as well as it could otherwise, because remember, it's a system based on competition. So I believe regardless of how you feel about Cuba, it's important to highlight some of their good achievements to stave off these drumbeats to war that do us no good. Also, so we can learn from what other countries are doing and hopefully reintroduce a bit of competition into the system again. Well, I hope you found this helpful. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe to my channel, click that like button, notification bell, and until next time, peace be with you.